why it works, that explains that, which I'd love to hear if anybody has a good explanation. Yes?
I mean, isn't that rule more of like a, is that more like a compositional type theory thing?
I think so, that it's a, and again, it's more of an older compositional theory, a lot of guitarists who may learn by ear probably don't know melodic minor, or if they do, maybe they do it inherently, based on what they've heard. And that's kind of the interesting brain connection things that I don't quite know much about. But yeah, I don't know where that rule comes from. Okay, and again, this gets back to some history and some discussion, and what we've talked about so far are the major and minor scales. Now, those have other names. They're also the Ionian and Aeolian modes. And I've heard some people say that modes are completely unimportant, and other people say modes are very useful. And sometimes they're useful for musical purposes, how they sound, and other times I've heard they're useful on a guitar for just physical purposes of moving up and down the guitar neck. So you're not limited to one place. So I'm not really sure. You can determine it for yourself. And there are some things that, like I said, these kind of brain things that just happen naturally. Supposedly, I remember reading that Eddie Van Halen typically uses Dorian. But as far as I understand, he doesn't have formal training. So it's not like he chose to do that, he just naturally does that. And so you can derive any of these modes pretty easily. That would be the C Ionian, and then the D Dorian is just starting on a D, same thing, just like keys. So then two keys at once. And you keep going on like that. And then what you can do, if you compare the Dorian notes relative to the major scale notes, right? So if you were looking at D major, you would have F sharp and C sharp. So D Dorian is taking the major scale and flattening the third and sixth, which is similar to a minor. A minor is a flattened third, sixth, and seventh. So they're similar in certain ways. They have similar flavors, and some of them are crazy. Like the Locrian note is just total garbage compared to everything else. You got flat second, flat third, diminished fifth, flat sixth, flat seventh. Like everything is modified. So that's not a common one. But Dorian, like I said, is used a lot. I just want you to be exposed to it. We're not going to do much with that. Okay, so chords. If the scale are a bunch of notes played sequentially, chords are a bunch of notes played simultaneously. You can also get something called an arpeggio, which is chords played sequentially. But anyway, so the simplest thing you can do, it's just like a combinatorics problem, right? Start with one note, add a second note. What are the notes you want to add? You can add any note and call it a chord, but a half step really doesn't sound good. Same thing, like a whole step's not particularly good. But like the most common two-note chord, or common dyad, is the power chord. Most heavy metal is founded based on the power chord. So. Yeah. Don't play Black Sabbath too much. But it has, it's useful for a lot of, like I said, a lot of common use. Black Sabbath is very much power chord, and you just slide it around the guitar neck, it's very easy. And the nice thing about the power chord is there's very few notes in it, so when you run it into a very heavily distorted amplifier, when you distort things, you get intermodulation products and notes interact with each other. So the simpler it is going into the distortion, the better off you are for the sound coming out. So power chords are very common in distorted music. And then you get other notes that sound good, like, right, so that's the fifth, that's a fourth. You can also get, like that's a major third, minor third. Those are useful things. do dyads. They're not very complex though. So normally we go to triads, which are 3-note chords. And you start off with some basic stuff. Just like you have major keys and major scales, you have minor keys and minor scales. So, you know, the major chord is formed from the first, the third, and the fifth of the major scale. So again, the first and the fifth sound the nicest together, and we'll look at that a little bit next week. Why are the first and fifth good together? And then the third comes in as the next thing. So a major chord. So that's a C major. F major, you know, and then G major. Nice, happy sounding chords. And then we can also do minor scales. So like a C minor would be. It's a little too loud. Chords don't work well on motor. You know, it's got this darker feel to it. You know, the minor chords. Okay. Then we also can do suspended chords, which are where you remove the third. So that's C major, but you can remove the third and add a second. And I get this, and it gives you the reason they're called suspended is they don't sound good by themselves; they lead to other things. So you're kind of suspending. You know, it's like suspense in the movie. It's suspense in music. That's a suspended second, and this would be the suspended fourth. And they're very common chords on the guitar. You know, there are a couple songs I can think of. Bad Moon Rising uses suspended fourth. Closer to Fine by Indigo Girls. They put them in there to create a little tension. And of course, when you add the second or fourth, you have to remove the third. Things that are too close together don't typically sound good together. Okay, so those are the basic triads. I think in the homework I just asked you to do major and minor. But at some point, we might consider doing suspended stuff too. After that, you can say, well, throw 4 notes together, and then we get the 7th chords. So typically, you take the major triad, the first, the third, the fifth, and you add a 7th to it. Now, the problem is if you take the 7th from the major scale, so that's called a major 7th chord, and it doesn't sound particularly nice, and it's not used as commonly, because the problem is the major 7th is only a half step away from the octave. So typically, more common 7th chords would be like the dominant 7th chord, which is C, E, G, B flat, so that you don't have that half step in there. It sounds really nice. And then you also do minor 7th chords are also fairly common. So, you know, it sounds dark like a minor, but it's got that extra complexity to it. And you know, they appear in different things, like dominant 7th stuff is used a lot in monochromatic Johnny Cash type of stuff. Okay, other chords. You can add other degrees. For instance, if you can diminish or augment the triad. So, you know, a major chord is the root, the third, the fifth, and then a minor chord is the root, the flat third, and the fifth. Well, you can also flat the fifth. So root, flat third, flat fifth is a diminished chord, which sounds even more dismal than a minor chord.